Story 1, 3rd floor, room 307. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was just a mistake. Hospitals are full of mistakes, and when you work the night shift, you learn to let the little ones slide. But this one, it stuck to me like something rotten, something spoiled. It started with a light, just a simple blinking call light. I had been working the graveyard shift at St. Mark's Hospital for nearly 4 years. The hours were grueling, but I liked the quiet, the way the world seemed to pause in the dead of night. I worked the 3rd floor, mostly post-op recovery and palliative care. The patients were either on their way home or on their way out of this world. Room 307 wasn't supposed to be occupied. It hadn't been for 10 years. A long time ago, long before I was hired, a patient killed himself in that room. I never knew the full details, only whispers between staff members. Some said he slit his wrists in the bathtub. Others claimed he jumped from the window, but everyone agreed on one thing. The room had been closed ever since. Except that night, the call light was on. At first, I thought maybe maintenance had screwed up and reconnected the wires by accident. Maybe someone had logged into the old system. I walked over, checked the door. Still locked, just as it had been for a decade. I stood there for a moment, watching the small red button flicker on the call panel. It was an old system, not one of the newer touchscreen interfaces. The kind that needed a physical press to activate. I pressed the reset button on the outside panel. The light turned off. I felt a little silly, chuckling to myself as I walked back to my station. Just a glitch, a little late-night weirdness. But then, not 5 minutes later, the light came back on. This time, I didn't reset it. This time, I grabbed my coworker, Maggie, who was finishing up her rounds. "Mags, the light in 307 is on," I said. My voice was even, but something about the way my stomach knotted up told me this wasn't just some random error. She frowned, glancing toward the hall where the old door sat at the end, a forgotten limb of the hospital. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," she sighed. "Let's check it out." We walked together, the soft squeak of our sneakers on the tile floor the only sound. When we reached the door, we both stopped. The call light was still glowing, a steady pulse of red above the doorframe. "Jesus," she muttered. "That's weird." She pulled out her keycard, swiped it, and slowly pushed open the door. The air inside was stale, like an attic left shut for too long. The room was just as it had been for a decade. A hospital bed, a nightstand, and an old heart monitor still plugged into the wall. The sheets were pulled tight and crisp, as though no one had ever slept in them. But the moment we stepped inside, a chill crawled up my spine. The bed was rumpled, like someone had just been lying there. Maggie stiffened beside me. Did you see that?" I nodded, but I didn't say a word. The heart monitor let out a single, weak beep, so soft it could have been imagined. Neither of us dared move. The room felt wrong. I don't mean in the way of abandoned places, with their stillness and dust-covered silence. Felt like it was waiting. It felt like something had just stepped out of sight, and if we turned too quickly, we might see it standing there, watching us. Maggie took a slow, shaky breath and reached over to reset the call light from inside. "Glitch," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "It's just a..." The heart monitor beeped again. We both jumped back toward the door. "Nope," Maggie said, backing out into the hallway. "Nope, nope, nope. We're calling maintenance." I slammed the door shut behind us. We didn't talk about it after that. We reset the call light. We told no one. For a few nights, nothing happened. I almost convinced myself it had been a glitch. But then, a week later, at 2:33 a.m., the light came back on. And this time, it wasn't just the light. I was alone at my station when I heard the faintest sound of rustling sheets from down the hall. The kind of noise you recognize when you've worked in a hospital long enough, the sound of a patient shifting in bed. Then came the slow, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. Faint, steady, impossible. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and turned on the voice recorder. I didn't know why, but I needed proof. My hands shook as I stepped toward room 307. The door was slightly open. Someone had unlocked it. A cold sweat broke across my skin. The monitor kept beeping, slow and steady. I reached out, hand trembling, and nudged the door open just a little more. The room was dark, but the bed was no longer empty. A figure lay under the sheets. I don't remember screaming, but I must have. My legs carried me back down the hall before my brain even caught up. Maggie and 2 other nurses came running, their faces twisted in concern. There's someone in there," I gasped. Maggie's expression darkened, but she squared her shoulders and pushed the door open. The bed was empty. The monitor was silent, but the indentation was still there, fresh on the mattress. No one said a word. No one had to. That night, I went home and listened to the recording on my phone. There was silence at first, and then the distinct sound of shuffling sheets. And something else, buried beneath the white noise. A voice, whispering my name. The next morning, I called in sick. And the day after that. And the day after that. I transferred to another floor the next week. A few months later, room 307 was finally sealed off for good. They never found an electrical malfunction. Never figured out why the monitors turned on by themselves. But some of the older nurses, they just nodded when they heard the stories. They remembered the patient from 10 years ago. The one who slit his wrists in that bed. The one whose body wasn't found until morning. The one who, some say, never really left. And at exactly 2:33 a.m. every night, the call light still turns on. Story 2, the hotel's 13th floor. It was the kind of night that settled into your bones. A quiet sort of loneliness that comes with working the graveyard shift at a nearly empty hotel. The Riverside Grand wasn't exactly a 5-star establishment. It had its moments. Wedding parties, corporate retreats. But tonight, it was just me, a security guard named Frank, and a handful of guests who preferred solitude to luxury. I'd been working here for 2 years, long enough to know the rhythms of the place, long enough to know when something felt wrong. At 2:13 a.m., the phone rang. "Front desk, this is James." A pause. Then, a voice distant and muffled. "You checked me in earlier," the man said. "Room 1306. But there's something wrong with the lights. They keep flickering." I frowned. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have a 13th floor." A pause. Then softer, insistent. "You checked me in yourself." I felt a slow, creeping unease worm its way up my spine. I glanced at the system, only 12 floors, same as always. I double-checked the occupancy list. No room 1306. "Sir, are you sure you're at the Riverside Grand?" I asked carefully. The man sighed. "Of course I am. Look, I don't want to cause trouble. Just, can someone check the lights?" I hesitated. My first instinct was to hang up, but something about the man's voice stuck with me. There was a tightness to it, a barely concealed panic. "All right, sir," I said slowly. "I'll send someone up." I hung up and stared at the screen. No room 1306. No 13th floor. I grabbed my radio. "Hey, Frank? You busy?" Static. Then his gruff voice. "What's up?" "Got a call from a guy in 1306. I said. "Only, we don't have a 1306. Silence. "You're screwing with me, right?" I swallowed. "No, I'm heading up. Can you meet me by the elevators?" "Yeah, be there in 5. By the time I got to the elevator, Frank was waiting, arms crossed. He was built like an old boxer, short but solid, with a nose that had been broken too many times. He squinted at me. "This some kind of joke?" I pressed the call button. Wish it was. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. We stepped inside, and I hesitated before pressing 12. The doors closed. The old brass panel didn't have a button for the 13th floor, just a blank space where it should have been. The numbers ticked up. 9, 10, 11, 12. And then, the elevator didn't stop. The button for 12 blinked, but we didn't slow down. The little screen above the doors flickered, the numbers warping. 12, then something unreadable, then 13. My stomach dropped. A soft chime. The doors slid open. Beyond them was a dark hallway that shouldn't exist. Frank let out a sharp breath. "Nope." He jabbed the closed door button. "Nope, Nope, nope. But the doors didn't close. The hallway stretched out, long and wrong, like it was a carbon copy of the real hotel but left to rot in the dark. The wallpaper was peeling, the lights dim and flickering, casting long, shuddering shadows. At the far end of the hall, a single door stood open. Room 1306. A whisper of sound, something shifting in the dark. Frank's hand was on his gun. "James," he said, voice tight, "we're leaving." But then, from down the hall, a voice, soft, familiar. "Hello." My breath hitched. It was the same man from the phone. "Sir," I called out. My voice wavered. A shadow passed across the doorway. Then the lights flickered off. For a second, we were trapped in pure, suffocating darkness. Then, a sound, wet and dragging, something heavy scraping against the floor. The lights flickered back on. A figure stood in the doorway of 1306. Frank grabbed my arm. "We're leaving." I didn't argue. We slammed the elevator button. The doors didn't move. A whispering sound crawled through the hall, like someone breathing right against my ear. I glanced back. The figure in the doorway wasn't moving, but it was watching. And then it took a step forward. The lights flickered. Another step. Closer. The lights went out again. A rush of cold air. A breath against my neck. And then, the elevator doors slammed shut. We dropped, plummeting. Frank swore, bracing himself against the wall. The numbers on the panel glitched, warping and twisting. Then, the elevator stopped. The doors slid open to the 12th floor, like nothing had happened. We stumbled out. The hallway was normal again, bright, whole, as if the 13th floor had never been there at all. Frank was breathing hard. "James, tell me that didn't just happen." Couldn't. We checked the security footage later. The cameras had glitched out when we were in the elevator. No footage, no proof. But at 2:13 a.m. every night, the phone rings, and a man asks about room 1306. And every night I let it ring. Story 3, the radio station Phantom. The graveyard shift at WZRD 103.3 was a lonely one. I'd been hosting Night Talk with Danny Carter for 6 years, sitting in the dim, soundproof booth, spinning tracks, and taking calls from insomniacs, truckers, and the occasional conspiracy nut. It was a job I loved until the night she called. It was 2:37 a.m. when the phone line blinked. "WZRD, you're on the air?" I said smoothly, adjusting the mic. "Who's this?" At first, there was just breathing, shaky, uneven. Then, "He's here. He's watching me." The woman's voice was barely above a whisper. I sat up straighter. "Ma'am, are you in danger?" A muffled sob. A scrape like the phone was being dragged across fabric. Then the line cut off. Dead air. I frowned and checked the call log. The number had no ID, no location. I leaned into the mic. "If you can, call back. We'll get you help." Nothing. I shook it off and queued up a Fleetwood Mac song to buy some time. But something about that call stuck with me. That voice. I swore I'd heard it before. During the next break, curiosity got the better of me. I copied the number and ran it through a reverse phone lookup. The results made my blood run cold. The number belonged to a woman named Claire Dalton. She had been murdered in her home 5 years ago. I stared at the screen. That was impossible. A chill ran through me. I glanced at the window facing the darkened studio hallway. I wasn't alone. A shape, a reflection that wasn't mine, shifted in the glass. The station's air conditioning kicked on, but the room suddenly felt suffocatingly cold. I turned back to the screen. The details of Claire's death were brutal. Stabbed 17 times. The killer was never caught. But the worst part? The last call she ever made was to a late-night radio station. 2:37 a.m. The phone rang again. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I reached for the receiver. "WZRD, you're on the air." A long silence. Then that same ragged breathing. "He's here." The line went dead. The lights in the studio flickered. A shadow moved behind the glass. And then, the static began to whisper.